Karen Blake stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, her hands shaking as the final words echoed through the massive chamber. The sound of the ceremonial gavel hitting the crystal podium felt like a death sentence to her ears. After 300 years of human membership in the Council, it was over. The vote had been unanimous among all 12 alien species. Not one single voice had spoken for humanity, the tall blue-skinned Zephyrian Council leader raised his 4 arms in the traditional gesture of finality. His voice carried across the hall with cold authority as he spoke the words that would change everything for the human race. By unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, the human species is hereby expelled from all Council territories and stripped of all membership privileges. All human colonies beyond the Sol system must be evacuated within 1 standard galactic year. All trade agreements are immediately void. All technology sharing contracts are cancelled. Humanity will return to their origin system and remain there indefinitely. Karen felt the weight of 4 billion human lives pressing down on her shoulders. She had served as Earth's primary ambassador for 20 years, had negotiated countless treaties, had built friendships with dozens of alien diplomats. Now those same aliens refused to even look at her. The Crystalline Federation representative, who had once invited her to his daughter's bonding ceremony, stared at the floor. The Aquatic Collective speaker, with whom she had shared many late-night discussions about philosophy and art, had their back turned completely. The charges against humanity were vague but damning. Excessive aggression and unpredictable expansion patterns was the official reason, but Karen knew the real truth. Humanity had grown too fast, colonized too many worlds, and developed too quickly. In just 3 centuries, they had gone from a single planet species to one of the most widespread civilizations in the galaxy. The other species had watched this rapid expansion with growing fear and jealousy. As Karen walked out of the council chamber, her communication device buzzed with urgent messages from across human space. The news was already spreading at light speed through the quantum communication networks. Colony governors, military commanders, and civilian leaders all wanted answers she didn't have. How could this have happened? What would they do now? Where would 4 billion people go? Captain Jake Morrison was leading a routine patrol mission near the edge of human territory when the message reached his ship, the New Frontier. He had been tracking some unusual energy readings near an unexplored system when his communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster, called out with urgency in her voice. "Captain, we're receiving a priority alpha transmission from Earth Command. It's marked as council-wide distribution." Jake felt his stomach drop as he read the message. Every human ship, every colony, every outpost was receiving the same devastating news at the same moment. The Galactic Council had expelled humanity from civilized space. All colonies had to be abandoned. All humans had to return to the Sol system within 1 year. After reading the message twice, Jake called his senior staff to the bridge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to his crew of 43 humans who had never even seen Earth, "we're going home. The problem is, for most of you, home is a place you've never been." Dr. Lisa Carter was reviewing agricultural reports from the Kepler colonies when her assistant burst into her office on Luna Station. The young man's face was pale with shock as he handed her the emergency communication pad. Lisa had been the head of colonial administration for 15 years, overseeing the development and growth of 47 human worlds. She knew every colony by heart, every population center, every critical resource depot. As she read the Council's decree, her mind immediately began calculating the impossible logistics. The Kepler agricultural worlds housed over 300 million people and produced food for dozens of other colonies. The mining operations in the Proxima system employed another 200 million workers and their families. The research stations, the manufacturing centers, the terraforming projects, all of it had to be abandoned. Lisa pulled up the master database of human settlements. The numbers were staggering. 2,400,000,000 humans lived outside the Sol system. Earth itself could barely support its current population of 1,600,000,000. Adding nearly 2.5 billion more people would create a humanitarian crisis unlike anything in human history. She immediately called an emergency meeting of all colonial governors. Within 6 hours, holographic projections of 47 different leaders filled her conference room. The conversations were heated and desperate. Governor Ben Walsh from New Charleston, humanity's crown jewel colony, slammed his fist on his desk so hard the hologram flickered. "They can't do this to us," he shouted. "We followed every council regulation, paid every tax, contributed to every joint project. This is our home," but Lisa knew the legal reality. When humanity had joined the council 3 centuries ago, they had signed agreements that gave the council ultimate authority over territorial disputes and membership issues. There was no appeal process, no higher court. The decision was final. Commander Greg Hayes received his orders while docked at the massive space station orbiting Titan. As head of the emergency response fleet, he was tasked with organizing the largest evacuation in human history. His fleet of 200 ships would have to move billions of people, along with whatever supplies and equipment they could carry, across vast distances of space. The math was terrifying. Even if every ship operated at maximum capacity and made continuous runs, it would take at least 18 months to evacuate everyone. But the council had only given them 12 months. That meant millions of people would be left behind unless they could find more ships or negotiate for more time. Greg spent the next 72 hours without sleep, coordinating with ship captains across human space. Every cargo vessel, every passenger liner, every military transport was pressed into service. Even small personal craft were organized into convoys to help move people and supplies. But it still wasn't enough. The first refugee ships began arriving at Luna Station within a week of the announcement. Chief Administrator Nancy Ford watched through the observation deck as ship after ship docked with desperate families clutching whatever possessions they could carry. The station's capacity was designed for 20,000 temporary residents, but already 30,000 had arrived, with more coming every day. Nancy had worked in space logistics for 30 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. Food. Supplies were running low, housing was completely inadequate, and the medical facilities were overwhelmed. Children who had never breathed natural air cried for homes on distant worlds they would never see again. Parents tried to explain why they had to leave everything behind, but how could anyone make sense of such cruelty? As Nancy looked out at Earth hanging in the darkness below, she wondered if humanity's homeworld could survive what was coming. The planet's resources had been carefully managed for centuries, with most heavy industry and food production moved to the colonies. Now all of that infrastructure would be lost, and billions of people would need food, shelter, and hope. The exodus had begun, but nobody knew if humanity would survive what came next. 6 months had passed since the Council's devastating announcement, and the true horror of humanity's situation was becoming clear to everyone involved. Colony leader Ben Walsh stood on the observation deck of New Charleston's central tower, watching as another transport ship loaded with families and their few remaining possessions lifted off from the spaceport below. The city that had taken 2 centuries to build was being systematically dismantled, and abandoned. Ben had been born on New Charleston 43 years ago. His parents had been among the first generation of colonists, and he had never set foot on Earth. This world, with its purple skies and twin moons, was the only home he had ever known. Now he was overseeing its death, organizing the evacuation of 8 million people who felt exactly the same way he did. The Centauri system had been humanity's greatest success story. 5 worlds had been terraformed over 3 centuries, each one supporting thriving communities. New Charleston alone had universities, museums, theaters, and research centers that rivaled anything on Earth. The planet's unique crystalline formations had inspired a whole new form of human art, and its vast agricultural domes fed dozens of other colonies. All of that was ending. The great libraries were being packed into cargo containers, their centuries of accumulated knowledge reduced to data storage units. The art galleries were empty, their masterpieces crated for a journey to a world most of the artists had never seen. Families were forced to choose between heirlooms and practical supplies, leaving behind graves of grandparents and great-grandparents who would rest forever on an abandoned world. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the evacuation fleet from her flagship, the carrier vessel Freedom's End. She had served in the human military for 35 years, had fought pirates and negotiated with hostile alien species, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this logistical nightmare. Her fleet of 150 ships was working around the clock, but the alien species were making everything harder with each passing day. The Zephyrian Empire had been the first to break their promises. 2 months earlier than scheduled, they had closed their jump gates to human traffic, claiming technical maintenance issues that everyone knew were lies. This forced Susan's ships to take longer routes through less efficient gates controlled by other species. Adding weeks to each evacuation run, the Crystalline Federation had started charging what they called administrative fees for using their space lanes. These fees consumed Earth's currency reserves at an alarming rate, but there was no choice except to pay. Without access to the major shipping routes, the evacuation would take twice as long, and millions more people would be stranded. Susan received daily reports from her captains about the increasing hostility they faced at alien-controlled stations. Ships that had once been welcomed for fuel and supplies were now treated like disease carriers. Human crew members were refused service at restaurants and shops. Some stations had started charging triple rates for basic services, knowing that desperate humans had no choice but to pay. Engineer Paul Turner was working 18-hour days trying to salvage what technology humanity could legally take with them. The Council's decree was very specific about shared technology. Anything developed through joint research projects or using alien-provided components had to be left behind or destroyed. This meant losing most of humanity's advanced computers, medical equipment, and communication systems. Paul stood in the primary data center of the Proxima Research Station, watching his team systematically wipe centuries of scientific research from the quantum computers. The knowledge itself could be preserved in simpler storage systems, but the advanced processing power that had made breakthrough discoveries possible would be lost forever. Human science would be set back by generations. The most heartbreaking part was the medical technology. Dr. Helen Ross had dedicated her life to xenobiology, studying how different species could work together for mutual benefit. Her research had led to treatments for diseases that had once killed millions of humans. Now she was forced to destroy her life's work because it had been developed using alien-provided laboratory equipment. Helen watched through tears as her assistant deleted decades of research data. The cancer treatments that used Zephyrian biotechnology, the neural therapies based on Crystalline Federation discoveries, the organ regeneration techniques learned from the aquatic collective, all of it had to go. Human medicine would return to the primitive level it had been at before joining the Council. The worst part was not the loss of technology, but the systematic humiliation. Helen had considered many of her alien colleagues to be friends. She had attended their ceremonies, learned their languages, and shared her own culture with them. Now those same colleagues refused to answer her messages, avoided her in the corridors, and acted as if she was already dead. Captain Lisa Turner was struggling to maintain order on the refugee transport ship New Hope as it traveled from the outer rim colonies toward Earth. The ship was designed to carry 3,000 passengers in reasonable comfort, but it was currently housing over 6,000 desperate people. Every corridor was packed with families and their belongings, every storage room had been converted into sleeping quarters, and the food supplies were running dangerously low. The overcrowding was creating serious problems. Fights broke out daily over sleeping space and food rations. Children were getting sick from the poor air quality, and the medical bay was overwhelmed with patients. Lisa had been forced to institute martial law just to keep basic services functioning, but she could see the desperation growing in people's eyes. 3 days out from Earth, disaster struck. The ship's main water recycling system failed, contaminated by overuse and poor maintenance. With over 6,000 people aboard, the backup systems could only provide enough clean water for about 4 days. Lisa sent out an emergency distress call, but the response she received made her blood run cold. 2. Alien ships were in the area and had received her distress signal. Both were from species that had once been humanity's allies. Both refused to offer assistance. Their captains sent polite messages, expressing regret but explaining that they were not authorized to provide aid to expelled species. Lisa watched. Her water supplies dwindle while alien ships passed by close. Enough to see with the naked eye. Dr. Peter Young had been the head of the Galactic Disease Control Center, working with medical experts from all 12 council species to prevent pandemics and develop new treatments. Now he was aboard a refugee ship heading for Earth, watching helplessly as preventable diseases spread through the overcrowded vessels. The children were suffering the most. Many of them had been born on colony worlds with carefully controlled environments and advanced medical care. Now they were crammed into unsanitary conditions with limited medical supplies. Peter had seen 17 cases of viral pneumonia in the past week, along with dozens of cases of malnutrition and stress-related disorders. What made it worse was knowing that cures existed. The alien medical databases contained treatments for every disease Peter was seeing, but humanity no longer had access to those databases. The quantum medical scanners that could diagnose problems in seconds had been left behind on the colonies. The gene therapy treatments that could cure genetic disorders had been developed using alien technology and were now forbidden. Peter worked with whatever supplies he could find, using medical techniques that had been obsolete for over a century. He felt like a doctor from the ancient past, trying to treat 25th century diseases with primitive tools. Many patients who could have been easily saved with proper equipment died because he simply didn't have what he needed. Captain Steve Adams patrolled the edge of the Sol system in his destroyer, the Defiant, watching for any sign of trouble. Long-range sensors showed alien ships stationed just beyond the official system boundary, maintaining what everyone knew was a blockade. The aliens called it a monitoring mission, but the message was clear. Humanity was now imprisoned in their own star system. Steve had been a military officer for 28 years, had fought in 3 different conflicts, and had always believed that human courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. Now he found himself facing an enemy he couldn't fight, protecting people who had already lost everything that mattered to them. The refugee ships kept coming, week after week, carrying millions of broken people who had lost their homes, their careers, and their futures. Earth's orbital facilities were completely overwhelmed, and the planet below was struggling to house and feed the massive influx of population. Steve wondered how long humanity could survive in such conditions, trapped and isolated while their former allies watched from the darkness beyond. 1 year had passed since the Council's expulsion order, and Earth was dying under the weight of 4 billion desperate people. Director Alan Roberts stood on the observation platform of the newly constructed Emergency Management Center, looking out over what had once been the Amazon basin, where ancient rainforests had grown for millions of years. Sprawling refugee camps now stretched to the horizon, housing over 200 million displaced colonists. Alan had been chosen to coordinate the global refugee crisis because of his experience managing large-scale disasters, but nothing in his background had prepared him for this. The camps were overcrowded, undersupplied, and growing larger every day as more evacuation ships arrived from the dying colonies. Disease was spreading through the populations, food riots were becoming common, and the Earth's environment was being destroyed by the sheer number of people it was being forced to support. The numbers were staggering and getting worse. Earth's original population of 1,600,000,000 had been carefully managed for centuries, with most industrial production and food generation moved to the colony worlds. The planet's ecosystems had been restored and protected, its resources carefully conserved. Now, with nearly 4 billion people crammed onto a world designed for less than half that number, everything was collapsing. Maria Santos had once been a terraforming engineer on the frontier worlds, responsible for transforming dead planets into gardens that could support millions of people. Now she found herself building basic shelters in the African refugee camps, using primitive materials and outdated techniques because all the advanced construction equipment had been left behind on the colonies. Her knowledge of atmospheric processors and soil regeneration systems was useless. When she was working with concrete blocks and metal sheeting, Maria's team was trying to build housing for 50,000 people in what had been Botswana, but they were falling further behind every day. The refugees kept arriving faster than shelters could be constructed, and the local infrastructure was completely overwhelmed. Power grids failed daily, water systems backed up, and waste management had become a critical health hazard. The psychological impact was almost as devastating as the physical conditions. These people had been farmers, scientists, artists, and engineers on thriving colony worlds. They had built cities, raised families, and created cultures that were uniquely their own. Now they were refugees living in crowded camps, dependent on charity and government rations, watching their children grow up in conditions their grandparents would have considered barbaric. Senator John Blake, Karen's brother, addressed the emergency session of the world government from the hastily constructed Assembly Hall in Geneva. The original United Nations building had been converted into refugee housing 6 months earlier, and the new facility was barely adequate for the expanded government needed to manage the crisis. John had been elected to represent the colony refugees, and his message to the assembly was grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the packed hall, "we are facing the complete collapse of human civilization. Our economy was built on interstellar trade and resource extraction from 47 colony worlds. We exported raw materials from the mining planets, imported manufactured goods from the industrial centers, and fed our population with crops grown on the agricultural worlds. All of that is gone." The statistics John presented were terrifying. Earth's gross domestic product had fallen by 80% in 1 year. Unemployment was at 95% among the refugee population. The planet's food production could feed maybe 2 billion people, but they now had 4 billion mouths to feed. Industrial capacity was insufficient to provide basic necessities, let alone the complex technology needed for space travel or advanced research. Currency had become almost meaningless. The galactic credits that had been humanity's primary money were worthless now that they were cut off from interstellar trade. Earth's governments were printing money to pay for refugee relief, but inflation was making prices double every month. Basic items like medicine, tools, and even simple electronics were becoming luxury goods that most people couldn't afford. Dr. Peter Young was working in a converted warehouse in what had been downtown Tokyo, now the central medical facility for the Pacific Refugee Zone. The building housed over 3,000 patients, but it had been designed as a storage facility, not a hospital. Peter had no advanced medical equipment, no access to the galactic medical databases, and no way to manufacture the complex drugs that modern medicine required. The diseases were getting worse. Respiratory infections were spreading through the overcrowded camps, killing thousands of children and elderly people every week. Malnutrition was becoming common as food supplies dwindled. Mental health problems were epidemic, with suicide rates climbing daily as people lost hope for any kind of future. What made Peter's job truly heartbreaking was the knowledge that all of these deaths were preventable. The medical technology existed to cure every disease he was seeing, but that technology was controlled by the alien species who had expelled humanity from civilized space. The quantum scanners that could diagnose problems in seconds were sitting unused on abandoned colony worlds. The automated pharmaceutical labs that could produce any needed medication had been destroyed or left behind. Peter worked with medical techniques that had been obsolete for over 2 centuries, trying to treat 25th century refugees with tools that wouldn't have been out of place in the 21st century. He performed surgery by hand because he had no surgical robots. He diagnosed diseases by looking at symptoms because he had no advanced scanning equipment. He watched patients die from conditions that could have been cured in minutes with proper medical technology. Captain Steve Adams continued his patrols of the Sol System's edge, but his job had become more depressing with each passing month. The alien blockade was tightening. with more ships arriving every week to ensure that humanity remained trapped in their home system. The aliens claimed they were there for monitoring and security purposes, but everyone knew the truth. They were prison guards. Steve's long-range sensors showed at least 40 alien vessels stationed just beyond the heliopause, representing all 12 council species. They weren't there to invade or attack, but to make sure humanity couldn't expand outward again. Any human ship that approached the system boundary was politely but firmly turned back. The message was clear: humanity was confined to Sol until the Council decided otherwise. The psychological impact of the blockade was almost as damaging as the physical isolation. Humans had been a spacefaring species for over 4 centuries, exploring new worlds and pushing the boundaries of known space. Now they were trapped in one star system, unable to explore, unable to expand, and unable to escape the overcrowded conditions that were slowly destroying their homeworld. Captain Frank Wilson led a small research team working in hidden laboratories beneath the lunar surface, part of a secret project that Dr. Amy Roberts was coordinating. If humanity was going to survive, they needed to become completely self-sufficient and develop technology that didn't depend on alien innovations. The work was dangerous, experimental, and represented humanity's only hope for eventual independence. Amy had been a quantum physicist before the expulsion, working on joint research projects with scientists from multiple alien species. Now she was leading a desperate effort to recreate advanced technology using only human knowledge and resources. The work was incredibly difficult because humanity had become dependent on alien science and engineering over the past 3 centuries. The secret facilities were hidden from the alien monitoring systems that undoubtedly watched everything happening in the Sol system. Amy's team was working on everything from basic computer systems to advanced propulsion technology, trying to build a foundation for human independence. They had to work with limited resources, using salvaged equipment and recycled materials. Because Earth's industrial capacity was focused on keeping 4 billion people alive, the breakthrough they needed seemed impossible. Human science had stagnated during the centuries of alien cooperation, with most research being collaborative efforts that combined human creativity with alien knowledge. Now they had to rebuild from scratch, rediscovering principles and techniques that had been forgotten when alien partners provided easier solutions. Amy looked at the data from their latest experiments and wondered if they would have enough time. Earth was dying slowly under the weight of its population. Resources were running out, and social order was beginning to break down. If they couldn't find a way to become independent soon, humanity might not survive long enough to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The 3rd year of isolation was ending, and humanity faced a choice between slow extinction and a desperate gamble on technologies they barely understood. The aliens who had expelled them were probably expecting human civilization to collapse within a decade, leaving Sol as a dead system that could be safely ignored. What they didn't understand was that desperation could be humanity's greatest strength. 3 years after the expulsion, something fundamental began to change in how humanity approached their desperate situation. Colonel Rick James stood on the bridge of the mining platform Titan's Reach, watching his crews push deep space extraction operations beyond anything that had been attempted before. Without alien trade partners, every asteroid, every moon, and every resource in the Sol system had become critical to human survival. Rick had been a military engineer before the crisis, but now he found himself leading the largest mining operation in human history. His teams were working in conditions that would have been considered impossible just a few years earlier, using equipment that had been jury-rigged from salvaged parts and desperate innovation. They were mining asteroids that previous generations had ignored as too difficult or dangerous to extract. But humanity no longer had the luxury of easy choices. The work was incredibly dangerous. Without access to alien safety technologies and automated systems, every mining operation relied on human workers risking their lives in the vacuum of space. Rick lost an average of 3 people per week to accidents that could have been prevented with proper equipment. But the alternative was watching 4 billion people slowly starve as Earth's resources ran out. What amazed Rick was how creative his people had become when faced with impossible challenges. Engineers who had once relied on alien design tools were building new equipment from scratch, using principles they had to rediscover through trial and error. Miners who had worked with automated systems were developing techniques that maximized human efficiency and intuition. They were learning to do more with less and somehow making it work. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source that nobody had considered important before the crisis. Dr. Tony Miller was studying fragments of early human technology in a converted laboratory on Ceres Station, looking at devices and systems that had been developed before humanity joined the Galactic Council. What he discovered would change everything humanity thought they knew about their own capabilities. Tony had been a technology historian, someone most people considered to have an interesting but useless job. Now his knowledge of pre-contact human innovation was proving invaluable. As he examined the old devices, he began to notice patterns that seemed impossible at first. The early human technologies were more advanced in some ways than what humanity had been using for the past 3 centuries. The evidence was undeniable once Tony knew what to look for. When humanity had joined the Galactic Council, the aliens had provided guidance that had actually limited human technological development. Systems that early humans had been developing were abandoned in favor of alien alternatives that seemed more advanced but were actually less suited to human ways of thinking and working. Tony's research revealed that human neural patterns interacted with quantum fields in ways that were unique among known species. The aliens had either not understood this difference or had deliberately discouraged humans from exploring it. Technologies that could have revolutionized human civilization had been abandoned for 3 centuries, while humanity followed alien development paths that were less effective for human minds. Engineer Carol Davis was leading teams that retrofitted abandoned space stations with purely human designs based on Tony's discoveries about pre-contact technology. Without alien systems as a foundation, human creativity was exploding in directions that nobody had expected. The solutions they developed were crude compared to the polished alien technologies, but they worked better for human operators and could be maintained with human resources. Carol had spent 20 years working with alien design systems, always wondering why they felt awkward and inefficient despite their advanced capabilities. Now she understood that those systems had been designed for alien thought patterns and physical capabilities. When humans built systems specifically for human use, the results were dramatically better despite using simpler components. The space stations that Carol's teams were modifying became testbeds for new approaches to everything from life support to power generation. They discovered that human intuition and pattern recognition could replace complex computer systems in many applications. They found that human manual dexterity allowed for more precise control than many automated systems. Most importantly, they learned that human adaptability made their systems far more reliable than rigid alien designs. Commander Bill Thompson was overseeing the most ambitious project of all, humanity's attempt to build their own jump gate technology without any alien assistance. The work was painstakingly slow because they had to develop everything from basic principles, but gradually patterns were emerging that suggested success might be possible. Bill had been a theoretical physicist before the crisis, working on joint research projects with alien scientists who had always seemed to know more than they were sharing. Now he was leading a team of desperate humans who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. They were working with salvaged equipment and recycled materials, but their understanding of the fundamental principles was growing every day. The crucial discovery came when Dr. Rachel Adams made a connection that had been hidden for centuries. Human consciousness interacted with quantum fields in ways that were completely different from any known alien species. This difference had been considered a limitation by the aliens, but Rachel realized it was actually humanity's greatest advantage. Rachel's experiments showed that human neural patterns could directly interface with quantum systems in ways that required massive computers when done by other species. What took alien civilizations entire facilities to accomplish? a trained human could do with relatively simple equipment. The implications were staggering. Humanity had been using the wrong approach to advanced technology for 300 years. Word of these discoveries spread through the refugee communities scattered across Earth and the inner system. Something remarkable began to happen. The despair that had dominated human society for 3 years started transforming into determination. People who had lost everything began to realize that maybe they hadn't lost the most important thing of all, their uniquely human abilities. The change was visible in the refugee camps first. Maria Santos noticed that her construction teams were working with renewed energy, developing building techniques that were more efficient than anything they had used on the colony worlds. The shelters they were building were crude by previous standards, but they were designed specifically for human needs and built with human capabilities in mind. Medical facilities began seeing improvements as Dr. Peter Young and his colleagues developed treatment methods that worked better for human physiology than the alien-influenced medicine they had been using. Without access to alien databases and equipment, they were forced to rely on human observation and intuition, and the results were surprisingly effective. The psychological impact was even more significant than the practical improvements. Humans who had spent 3 years feeling helpless and defeated suddenly had hope for the future. They weren't just trying to survive anymore, they were building something new and uniquely human. Captain Steve Adams reported that morale among his patrol crews had improved dramatically as news of the technological breakthroughs spread through the fleet. The alien blockade was still in place, but it no longer felt like a prison sentence. Instead, it was becoming a protective barrier behind which humanity could develop capabilities that might eventually surpass anything the Galactic Council possessed. The 4th year of isolation was beginning, and humanity was no longer the broken species that had been expelled from civilized space. The refugees were becoming pioneers, the desperate were becoming determined, and the defeated were becoming dangerous. What the aliens had intended as punishment was transforming into opportunity. Dr. Amy Roberts looked at the latest test results from the secret lunar laboratories and smiled for the first time in years. The data showed that human-designed systems were not only working, but were performing better than equivalent alien technologies in several key areas. Humanity was on the verge of achieving true technological independence, and once they did, they would never again be vulnerable to alien manipulation. The aliens watching from beyond the system boundary probably thought they were containing a dying civilization, but they were actually witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had been forced to discover its true potential through desperation and isolation. 7 years had passed since humanity's expulsion, and the moment everyone had been working toward finally arrived. The first human-built jump gate came online in the asteroid belt, its design completely unlike anything in the galactic databases. Captain Frank Wilson stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Pioneer's Dream, watching as the massive ring-shaped structure powered up with energy patterns that defied everything the aliens thought they knew about. Faster than light travel. Frank had volunteered to lead the first expedition through the new jump gate, knowing that it might be a one-way trip. The technology was revolutionary but untested, developed by desperate humans who had been forced to think beyond the limitations that alien guidance had imposed for centuries. Unlike the rigid jump gates used by the Galactic Council species, this one was flexible, capable of reaching destinations that had never been mapped by alien explorers. Dr. Amy Roberts watched from the control center as final system checks were completed. 7 years of secret research in hidden laboratories had led to this moment. The breakthrough had come when they realized that human consciousness could interface directly with quantum fields, allowing for navigation methods that no other known species could replicate. They weren't just building a jump gate, they were creating a completely new way to travel between stars. The destination Frank had chosen was deliberately ambitious. Instead of trying to reach the carefully mapped systems controlled by the Council species, they were aiming for unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. If humanity was going to reclaim their place in the universe, they needed to find territory that no other species had claimed. where they could build something entirely their own. The jump gate activated with a flash of light that was visible from Earth, and the pioneer's dream disappeared into unknown space. For 6 hours, Amy and her team waited for any signal from the expedition, knowing that failure would mean the loss of their best ship and most experienced crew. When Frank's voice finally came through the quantum communicator, the words he spoke would change galactic history forever. "Control, this is Pioneer's dream," Frank's voice crackled with excitement and discovery. "We've arrived in an uncharted system with 7 planets, 3 of which appear to be habitable. But that's not the most important discovery. We're detecting artificial structures on the 4th planet, ruins that appear to be millions of years old." Dr. Julie Taylor was part of Frank's crew, leading the xenorchaeology team that would investigate the ancient ruins. As their shuttlecraft descended toward the mysterious structures, Julie realized they were looking at something that would revolutionize understanding of galactic history. The ruins were vast, covering an area larger than most human cities, and they showed clear signs of having been built by an advanced technological civilization. The most shocking discovery came when Julie's team began analyzing the architectural patterns and construction techniques. The ruins showed the same hallmarks they had seen in Galactic Council territories, the telltale signs of alien guidance that had shaped the development of countless species. But these ruins were ancient, far older than any known Council civilization. As Julie's team explored deeper into the ruined city, they found evidence that chilled them to the bone. This wasn't the first civilization to receive Council guidance, and it wasn't the first to be abandoned when that guidance was withdrawn. The pattern became clear as they uncovered more sites. The Council had been systematically guiding species to dependence, then eliminating them when they became too advanced or numerous. Julie discovered records carved in crystalline matrices that had survived millions of years. The civilization that had built this city had been spacefaring and technologically advanced, but they had made the same mistake humanity almost made. They had trusted alien guidance and allowed their own development to be shaped by outside influences. When they became too successful, too widespread, they had been expelled from Council space just like humanity. The difference was that this ancient species had not survived their isolation. Their cities were empty, their people gone, their civilization reduced to ruins that served as a warning across the ages. Julie realized that humanity's expulsion was not unique. It was part of a pattern that had been repeated dozens of times throughout galactic history. Captain Dan Mitchell was leading the second wave of human exploration, commanding a small fleet of ships that had been built in secret over the past 3 years. His mission was to establish permanent bases in the unexplored regions beyond Council space, creating a foundation for humanity's return to interstellar civilization. What he found in the dark reaches between star systems was even more significant than the ancient ruins. Dan's sensors detected artificial structures in the void, between stars, space stations, and ships that had been hidden in the darkness for centuries. As his fleet approached the largest structure, they received a transmission in a language that human computers could not translate. The voice that spoke was clearly not human, but it carried a tone of hope and excitement that was unmistakable. The beings who met Dan's team were unlike any species in the Council databases. They were survivors from multiple civilizations that had been expelled from Council space over the millennia, refugees who had banded together in the dark regions where the Council never ventured. They had been waiting for centuries for someone with the strength and determination to challenge the Council's dominance. Their leader was an elderly being who called herself Keeper of the Remnant, representing 6 different species that had been cast out when they became too successful or independent. She spoke through a translation device as she explained the truth that the Council had hidden from the galaxy for millions of years. "Your species is not the first to be expelled," she told Dan through the crackling translator. "We have all walked the path of exile and abandonment. The Council fears competition, fears any species that might grow strong enough to challenge their control. They guide young civilizations until they become dependent, then cast them aside when they show signs of true independence. The keeper led Don through their hidden facilities, showing him technologies that had been developed by desperate species fighting for survival. Each expelled civilization had contributed something unique to their collective knowledge, creating innovations that the Council had never imagined. They had weapons that could penetrate Council shields, ships that could travel faster than Council vessels, and most importantly, they had the determination that came from having lost everything once before. We have been waiting for a species with the strength to lead us back to the light, the keeper explained. Your people have shown something we have not seen in 1,000 years, the ability to grow stronger through suffering, to become more dangerous when cornered. We believe humanity may be the key to ending the Council's reign. Admiral Kelly Turner received reports from the exploration fleets as she coordinated humanity's rapid expansion into the unexplored regions. Without the restrictive regulations that had limited human growth for centuries, their expansion proceeded at a pace that amazed even the humans themselves. Each new system was claimed through the simple principle of first discovery, and human colonies were being established faster than ever before. Kelly had been promoted to lead the new Human Space Command, coordinating military and civilian expansion efforts. The refugee camps on Earth were emptying as people volunteered for the dangerous but exciting work of building new colonies in unknown space. The desperation that had driven humanity for 7 years was transforming into ambition and determination. The colonies being established in the new territories were different from anything humanity had built before. Instead of following alien architectural principles or using modified Council technologies, these settlements were purely human in design and function. They were built to maximize human capabilities and accommodate human psychology, creating communities that felt more natural and comfortable than the old colonies ever had. Captain Frank Wilson continued leading exploration missions deeper into unknown space, discovering system after system that had never been touched by Council influence. His ships carried the most advanced technology humanity had ever developed, systems that worked better than anything the aliens had provided during the centuries of cooperation. The most remarkable discovery came when Frank's team found evidence of other active civilizations that had never joined the Galactic Council. These species had developed independently without alien guidance, and their technologies and societies were radically different from anything in Council space. They were potential allies who shared humanity's independence and self-reliance. The final phase of humanity's transformation began when Captain Steve Adams, still patrolling the Sol system boundary, detected massive changes in the alien blockade. The Council ships that had maintained their watch for 7 years were being reinforced with additional vessels, and their sensor sweeps were becoming more intensive. The aliens had finally realized that something was happening in human space. Karen Blake, now serving as Director of External Relations, prepared for what she knew would be humanity's last diplomatic contact with the Galactic Council. The aliens were demanding to know why human ships had been detected beyond